He saw her crouched in the rain-soaked alley, blue skin glistening under neon lights as she ate scraps alongside wild dogs. Most would look away. On Tyrus, survival meant minding your own business. But Kieran Wolf saw something else. A flicker of intelligence in her wary eyes, a dignity others missed. This mechanic, who believed trust could get you killed, was about to make a choice that the rain never stopped falling on Tyrus. Neon signs bled through the downpour, creating liquid patterns on wet pavement. This was Terrace, a colony built under crushing gravity. Everything felt heavier here, from walking to breathing. People moved with deliberate economy, conserving energy for essential tasks. Merchants set up stalls in covered alleys, their goods protected by waterproof tarps. Humans traded with scaled and feathered aliens from nearby systems. Transactions happened fast with minimal talk. Credit chips changed hands, goods were weighed, customers moved on. No one lingered. No one made eye contact longer than necessary. Trust became a liability in that environment. You assumed every deal might be your last, every stranger a potential threat. Scarcity dictated every interaction. Fresh water cost 3 times what it did on core worlds. Nutrient bars came in sealed containers because theft was common. People guarded their purchases with both hands, holding them close to their bodies as they navigated crowded walkways. The colony's recycled air carried the scent of ozone and damp metal, a constant reminder of the environmental systems fighting a losing battle against the planet's conditions. Wild dogs roamed these streets, descended from earth breeds but changed by generations on Terrace. They developed thicker hides, broader paws for traction on wet surfaces. Their eyes glowed faintly in the low light, adapted to perpetual twilight conditions. They moved in packs of 3 or 4, scavenging edible waste from overflow bins. Most citizens ignored them, stepping around the animals without breaking stride. The dogs were just another part of the ecosystem, neither threat nor ally. In this environment, noticing someone else's struggle was dangerous. Attention could mean obligation, and obligation could get you killed. People perfected the art of looking without seeing, hearing without listening. They became experts in strategic blindness, building mental walls against the suffering around them. The colony's survival depended on this collective indifference, this unspoken agreement to prioritize self-preservation above all else, which made what happened next remarkable. Kieran Wolf moved through this world like everyone else, maintaining that careful distance. His workshop stood near the market's edge, a converted storage container reinforced against the elements. He knew the rules, lived by them for years. But rules have exceptions, and sometimes observation becomes action, despite every survival instinct warning against it. The mechanic watched the blue-skinned girl from his doorway, rainwater dripping from the awning overhead. His gaze didn't slide away like others would. He noted how she moved, how the dogs accepted her presence. He saw past the surface circumstances to something deeper at work. In a place where everyone looked away, one man kept watching. Kieran's hands were always stained with grease. Not the kind that washed off easily. This was ground-in grime from years of working with engine parts, power converters, and salvage machinery. Every line on his palms told the story of a repair made, a transaction completed. None told the story of trust given. His daily rhythm never varied. Rise before first light. Run diagnostics on his own life support systems first, a lesson learned the hard way. Then open the reinforced door of his workshop, a converted cargo container sealed against Tyrus's endless rain. The space smelled of ozone, lubricant, and recycled air. Tools hung in precise rows. Spare components sat sorted in labeled bins. Order was his defense against the chaos outside. He moved through the marketplace like a shadow. Purchases were quick, efficient. He never lingered at stalls, never made small talk. His eyes tracked exits, assessed threats, calculated risk. People knew him as the mechanic, reliable, skilled, expensive. They didn't know his name. He preferred it that way. His philosophy was simple, carved from experience. Trust could get you killed. Attachment was a vulnerability. He'd seen it happen. Good people dragged down by the weight of someone else's problems. He built walls instead of bridges. His workshop was both fortress and cage. The reinforced door kept danger out, but it also kept everything else out. Light from a single yellow bulb reflected off polished metal surfaces. No personal items decorated the space. No images of family, no souvenirs from other worlds. Just a functional cot, a hygiene station, and the tools of his trade. This isolation came at a cost. He rarely spoke except to quote a price. He forgot the sound of his own laughter. Some nights the silence felt heavier than Tyrus's gravity. But safety had its price, and he paid it without complaint. He believed nothing could penetrate that armor. Not pity, not curiosity, not guilt. Then he saw the girl. Blue skin shimmering under the flickering neon. Small frame crouched beside the wild dogs, moving with a precision that didn't match her circumstances. His eyes didn't glide past her like they should have. They stuck. They noticed. For the first time in years, he saw a person instead of a problem. He watched the careful way she ate, the alertness in her posture even while scavenging. The dogs didn't snarl at her. They tolerated her presence, a rare thing on these streets. It was a small thing, that moment of attention. A crack no wider than a hairline fracture in plasteel, but it was enough. His hand, usually quick to lock the door at dusk, stayed on the latch. His breath caught just slightly. The calculation in his mind shifted. The numbers didn't add up anymore. This scene defied the logic he'd built his life upon. He didn't move to help, not yet. But he didn't look away either. He stood in the rain-streaked doorway watching a blue-skinned child share space with feral dogs, and felt the first tremor in the foundation of everything he believed. The world hadn't changed. The danger hadn't lessened, but something in the way he saw it had .ld unravel his entire world. Rainwater slicked her blue skin, catching the neon glow from the signs overhead. She crouched beside an overflow bin, picking through discarded food wrappers. Her fingers moved with deliberate precision, not the frantic grabbing of someone truly starving. She selected a half-eaten protein bar still in its wrapper, examined it for contamination, then carefully peeled back the packaging. The movements were too controlled for a street child. Too practiced. 3 wild dogs circled nearby, their matted fur dark with moisture. They should have driven her off or attacked. Instead, they maintained a respectful distance, occasionally sniffing the air, but making no aggressive moves. Their ears twitched toward her, but their posture remained neutral. They recognized her as something separate from the usual threats. Something not quite prey, not quite competitor. Kieran watched from the shadow of his doorway. Around him, market-goers hurried past the alley entrance. Their eyes slid away from the scene. They adjusted their routes without conscious thought, giving the dogs wide berth while pretending not to see the blue child among them. Survival on Tyrus required this selective blindness. Noticing problems meant potentially having to solve them, and nobody had energy to spare. But Kieran kept watching. He noted how she wiped her mouth after eating, how she tucked loose strands of hair behind her ear despite the rain. Her clothing was ragged but relatively clean, the tears mended with careful stitching. These were small things, meaningless to anyone not looking closely, but he was looking closely. Her eyes caught the light when she glanced up, scanning the alley entrance. They held a sharp awareness that didn't belong in a scavenger's face. She assessed the street like a strategist evaluating terrain, noting patrol patterns, calculating risk. The intelligence in that glance was unmistakable. This was no feral child surviving on instinct. This was someone making conscious choices under impossible circumstances. The dogs finally moved closer, drawn by the scent of food. One nudged her hand with its wet nose. Instead of jerking away, she broke off a piece of the protein bar and placed it on the ground between them. The animal took it gently without snapping. The interaction spoke of established rapport, not chance encounter. She had been here before. They knew each other. Kieran felt the shift inside himself. The calculation changed. This wasn't just pity anymore. Curiosity took root. Who was this child who moved with such grace among feral dogs? Who maintained dignity while eating garbage? The questions piled up where there should only have been indifference. His hand tightened on the doorframe. The safe choice was to turn away, to lock the door and forget what he'd seen, but safety suddenly felt like cowardice. The girl wiped her hands on her trousers and stood up, scanning the alley again. For a moment, her gaze passed over his doorway. Did she see him watching? Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture tightened. She knew she was being observed. Kieran stepped back into shadows, his mind racing. The walls he'd built around himself felt suddenly fragile. This changed things. This changed everything. He needed to decide whether to intervene or walk away, and both choices felt equally dangerous. The pack leader bared its teeth, stepping closer to the girl. Kieran's body tensed. Every instinct told him to stay in the doorway. Safety lay behind reinforced metal, but his eyes stayed fixed on the scene. The dogs had been tolerant before, but hunger changed things. Their posture shifted from curious to threatening. The girl held her ground, but she was small. Outnumbered, he calculated the risk. Drawing attention meant creating a record. Someone might notice him. Someone might remember. On Tyrus, being remembered was dangerous, but watching a child get mauled was worse. His hand went to the tool belt at his waist. Fingers found a loose coupling bolt, heavy and solid. Not a weapon, but it could make noise. He scanned the alley walls. A metal ventilation duct ran along the building opposite. A good target. Hard surface would echo. He threw the bolt underhand, low and fast. It struck the duct with a sharp clang that cut through the rain's steady patter. The sound reverberated down the alley, unnatural and sharp. The dogs' heads snapped toward the noise. Their bodies went rigid, ears pricked. The pack leader growled, but its attention was diverted. Kieran remained in shadow, not moving. He didn't want them to see him yet. The animals hesitated, torn between the known food source and the unknown threat. Another metallic clang followed as the bolt bounced off a second surface. That decided it. Survival instincts took over. The dogs turned and bolted down the alley, disappearing into the misty rain. Their paws slapped wet pavement, fading into the distance. The girl didn't run. She stayed crouched, her eyes scanning the darkness where the sound originated. She looked alert, not frightened. Assessing. Kieran stepped from the doorway into the light rain. He kept his movement slow, non-threatening. His hands remained visible at his sides. The girl watched him approach, her blue skin gleaming under a flickering sign. She didn't speak, didn't move. Her eyes tracked his every motion, calculating his intentions. He stopped several paces away, giving her space. The diversion had worked, but now he faced a different problem. He had broken his own rule. He had intervened. There was no going back from that. He noticed how she held herself. Not like someone rescued, but like someone evaluating a new variable. Her gaze dropped to his hands, noting the grease stains, the calluses. She was reading him just as he had read her. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the patter of rain on metal roofs. He had crossed a line he'd drawn years ago. The isolation he'd maintained now felt like a distance he could no longer afford. This small act had changed something fundamental. He wasn't just an observer anymore. He was a participant. Her eyes narrowed slightly, still wary but curious. She shifted her weight, ready to move, but waiting to see what he would do next. The decision hung between them, unspoken but clear. He had made the first move. Now it was her turn to respond. The mechanics of survival had just become more complicated. He moved slowly, keeping his hands visible. The girl watched him, her body tense like a coiled spring. Rain dripped from her blue hair onto her shoulders. Kieran reached into his pocket, pulled out a sealed nutrient bar. The wrapper showed it was factory sealed, untampered. He held it out, not too close. Just within her view. "This is better," he said. His voice sounded rough from disuse. "It has vitamins and protein and stuff. On Tyrus, offering food meant more than charity. It created obligation. It formed a link between two people that couldn't easily be broken. Most citizens would rather watch someone starve than create that connection. Resources were too scarce, trust too dangerous." But Kieran had already crossed that line when he threw the bolt. Now he stood in the rain, holding out a day's worth of nutrients, waiting. The girl's eyes flicked from his face to the bar and back. She assessed the situation with a calm that felt unnatural for her age. Her gaze lingered on the unbroken seal, confirming it was safe. She noted how he held it, not thrust toward her, not demanding acceptance. Just offered. After a long moment, she reached out. Her fingers were slender, blue against the silver wrapper. She took the bar with a careful motion, ensuring their hands didn't touch. The exchange happened without words. She studied the packaging, turning it over to read the ingredients. Her movements were methodical, practiced. She tore the wrapper open along the perforated edge, a small precise tear. She took a bite, chewed slowly. Her eyes never left him. She wasn't just eating. She was evaluating. Testing the food, yes, but also testing him. Watching for any change in his posture, any sign of hidden intention. The dynamic shifted in that quiet exchange. He was no longer just a stranger who'd chased off dogs. He was someone who'd shared resources, given something without immediate demand for repayment. That meant something on Terrace. It meant everything. She finished the bar, folded the wrapper neatly, and tucked it into her pocket. No litter, no waste. Her eyes met his again, and for the first time she spoke. Her voice was clear, softer than he expected, with a formal cadence that didn't match her ragged clothing. "Your hands are dirty," she said. Not an accusation, an observation. Factual, neutral. She looked at his grease-stained fingers as if reading a story written there. The comment surprised him. Not thank you, not questions about why he helped, just an assessment of his physical state, as if she'd been studying him the whole time, filing away details. He looked down at his hands, the embedded grime that never quite washed out. She saw past the mechanic, past the intervention. She saw the man beneath the stains. The observation hung between them, changing the nature of their interaction once again. She wasn't just accepting help, she was gathering intelligence. Her words hung in the damp air between them. Not a question, not a judgment. A simple observation stated with the clarity of a diagnostics report. "Your hands are dirty." Kieran looked down at his own fingers as if seeing them for the first time. The grease stains were permanent, ground into the skin around his nails, tracing the lines of his palms. He'd stopped noticing them years ago. They were part of the uniform. The girl's eyes remained fixed on his hands, studying them with an analytical focus that felt completely at odds with her circumstances. She wasn't just seeing dirt. She was reading evidence. Her gaze moved from the blackened cuticles to the calluses along his fingertips, the slight swelling around his knuckles. These weren't the hands of a laborer who moved crates or worked construction. The patterns told a different story. "You work with machines," she said. Her voice held no uncertainty. "Small components. Precision work. The stains are from lubricants, not soil. Your right thumb has a callus from gripping tools. The left index finger shows burn patterns from soldering." Kieran felt a slow chill that had nothing to do with the rain. Street children didn't talk like this. They didn't assess people with the calm precision of an engineer. Her vocabulary, her phrasing, the way she categorized information, all of it spoke of education, of training. This was someone who'd been taught to observe, to analyze, to deduce. He remained silent, watching her. The ragged clothing, the damp hair, the scavenged meal, all of it was suddenly unconvincing. A disguise that didn't quite fit. The sophistication in her words betrayed a background far removed from alleyways and overflow bins. She had recognized specific lubricant stains, identified tool marks, understood the difference between various types of grime. This wasn't street knowledge. This was technical education. His surprise must have shown on his face. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes acknowledged his reaction. She knew she'd revealed too much. The careful balance between them shifted again. He was no longer the mysterious benefactor. She was no longer the helpless child. They were two people with secrets standing in the rain, each trying to read the other. He found his voice rough from disuse. "You know machinery," she didn't confirm or deny. Her eyes flickered to the pendant around her neck, a movement so quick he almost missed it. The gesture was protective, instinctive. Her hand didn't rise to touch it, but her attention shifted there for a fraction of a second. The pendant was metal, intricately worked, now partially hidden beneath her damp tunic. It looked too finely made for a scavenger. Out of place among the rags, Kieran's curiosity deepened, pushing past caution. The pieces didn't fit. The technical knowledge, the formal speech patterns, the sudden protective gesture toward jewelry that clearly held value. This was more than just a street child. This was someone with a history, someone who'd fallen a long way from wherever she started. The rain continued its steady patter on the metal roofs around them. The moment stretched, filled with unasked questions. He looked from her face to the pendant, then back to her eyes. The mystery had just grown deeper, more compelling. He needed to understand who she was, why she was here, what that pendant meant. The isolation he'd valued for so long suddenly felt like ignorance. He had to know more. Kieran's eyes caught the glint of metal beneath her tunic. The pendant wasn't just jewelry. It was a masterwork of precision engineering, a small disc of polished alloy hanging from a fine chain. The design showed a stylized bird in flight, wings outstretched, encircled by what looked like circuitry patterns. The craftsmanship was flawless. No rough edges, no imperfections. This wasn't market stall trinketry. This was the kind of item you'd see in a secured display case, not around the neck of a child eating scraps in an alley. He nodded toward it. "That's well made." Her reaction was instantaneous. Her hand flew to the pendant, covering it completely. Her fingers curled protectively around the metal. Her posture stiffened, eyes sharpening with sudden tension. The calm, analytical demeanor vanished, replaced by something guarded and defensive. She took a half step back, putting more distance between them. The change was dramatic. This wasn't just a prized possession. This was something she needed to hide. The contrast was jarring. The fine metalwork against her frayed clothing, the sophisticated emblem against her scavenger's existence. The pendant spoke of wealth, heritage, access to resources. Her current situation spoke of loss, desperation, survival at the lowest level. These two realities didn't belong together. They clashed, creating a dissonance that demanded explanation. "What is it?" Kieran asked, keeping his voice neutral. She hesitated, her fingers still tight around the hidden pendant. She studied his face, weighing the risk of answering. Her wariness made sense now. This wasn't just about personal safety. This was about protecting a secret. "It's a seal," she said finally. The words came out reluctant, measured. House Alarian. The name meant nothing to Kieran, but the term house carried weight. It implied nobility, lineage, a place in some structured hierarchy far from Tyrus's chaotic streets. A royal seal on a scavenger child. The pieces began shifting into a new, more dangerous configuration. Her voice dropped lower, almost lost in the rain's patter. "My family's emblem." The admission changed everything. She wasn't just a displaced orphan. She was someone with a history, a title, a position that clearly meant something somewhere. The intelligence in her eyes, the formal speech patterns, the technical knowledge, it all made sense now. This was a person raised with education and expectation, now reduced to hiding in alleys. The implications began unfolding in Kieran's mind. Royalty didn't end up scavenging without reason. Something catastrophic must have happened, something that forced a child of privilege into the gutters of Tyrus. The pendant wasn't just jewelry, it was evidence, a connection to a past that clearly held danger. He looked at her differently now. The blue skin, once just an alien characteristic, might signify something more specific, a particular lineage, a recognizable bloodline. The pendant made her identifiable. It made her a target. Her survival strategy of blending in, of being overlooked, was compromised by carrying such a distinct artifact. The danger became tangible. If someone recognized that seal, her life was worth nothing. The syndicates, the bounty hunters, the corporate enforcers, they all paid well for high-value targets. A royal heir would command a substantial price, dead or alive. The quiet alley suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. Every shadow could hold a threat. Every passerby could be an enemy scout. Kieran's protective instincts, dormant for years, stirred awake. This wasn't just about giving a child a meal anymore. This was about safeguarding someone who carried a death sentence around her neck. The weight of that responsibility settled on him, heavy and unavoidable. He had stepped into a situation far more complex than he'd imagined. The girl's eyes watched him, waiting to see how he would react to this revelation. The trust she'd extended was fragile, conditional. One wrong move, one sign of betrayal, and she would vanish back into the rain. He understood that now. The stakes had just been raised dramatically. The story unfolded slowly in fragments. Her name was Celia. House Alarian wasn't just a noble family. It was a bloodline. Her people, the Azurans, carried knowledge in their very DNA. Memories, histories, technical schematics, all encoded in genetic patterns passed from parent to child. She explained it with a clinical detachment that felt unnatural for a child. This wasn't a story. It was a briefing. The gap between her lineage and her current reality was vast. She should have been in a palace, surrounded by tutors and guards. Instead, she crouched in a rain-soaked alley, explaining biological data storage to a mechanic. Her formal speech patterns made sense now. The precise vocabulary, the analytical gaze. She wasn't just educated, she was a living archive. The Azuran memory mechanism worked through deep meditation. Information wasn't recalled like a normal memory. It was accessed like pulling data from a secure server. The knowledge existed in her cells, waiting for the right triggers. Star charts, historical records, technical specifications for technology long since lost. It was all there, locked inside her. This biological knowledge made her incredibly valuable. Enemies didn't just want to kill her. They wanted to extract what she carried. The information in her blood could reveal fleet movements, defense weaknesses, attack vectors for entire star systems. She was a strategic asset, a walking database of military intelligence. Capturing her meant capturing the cumulative knowledge of her people. Her survival was no accident. When her house fell, she didn't panic. She adapted. She used the one advantage nobody expected from a royal child. She made herself invisible. She hid in plain sight, adopting the mannerisms of a street urchin. She learned to scavenge to avoid attention, to endure hardships her upbringing never prepared her for. She survived because she understood her own value better than her pursuers did. The specific knowledge she carried remained vague. She mentioned star charts first, navigation data for forgotten routes through unstable regions of space. Then she hinted at historical records, treaties, conflicts, the rise and fall of empires. But the most valuable data, the reason hunters pursued her so relentlessly, involved current threats. She knew things about enemy fleet compositions, planned invasion routes, weaknesses in offensive weapon systems. This wasn't ancient history. This was tactical intelligence that could save billions of lives. She revealed herself as both survivor and strategic weapon. The ragged clothing, the hungry desperation, it was a costume. Beneath it lay a razor-sharp mind trained in analysis and strategy. She had evaded professional hunters for months using nothing but her wits and the scattered knowledge she could access from her own biology. She wasn't just hiding. She was gathering information, planning her next move, waiting for an opportunity to use what she knew. The pendant around her neck was more than Ajiazu Huijiang. It was a key, a focal point for accessing deeper memory layers. She touched it when she concentrated, when she needed to find specific information in the vast database of her ancestry. It connected her to everything she had lost and everything she still needed to protect. This revelation changed the stakes completely. Kieran wasn't protecting a child anymore. He was safeguarding intelligence that could alter the balance of power across the sector. Her value made her a target for every major syndicate and corporate entity, with expansionist ambitions. The hunters wouldn't be amateurs. They would be professionals equipped with technology designed for one purpose: extraction. The quiet alley no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like a trap about to spring shut. The people looking for her would stop at nothing. They were already coming. Celia's voice dropped to a near whisper when she said the name, Black Mines Syndicate. Her hands tightened around her arms. The fear was immediate, physical. It wasn't just a story. It was a memory. These were the people who had hunted her family. They didn't just want any royal. They wanted her specifically for the information in her blood. Their reach made escape seem impossible. They operated across multiple colonies, their network stretching through official channels and criminal underworlds alike. They locked down spaceports, bribed officials, deployed tracking teams with military precision. Their symbol was a black tunnel with a red line through it, a mark that brought instant compliance wherever it appeared. People looked away when they saw it. They knew what it meant. Their methods were systematic and ruthless. They used advanced scanners to detect Azuran genetic signatures. They planted informants in refugee camps and marketplaces. They didn't just hunt. They harvested. Captured targets were taken to converted ore processing facilities, places designed for extraction in every sense of the word. The syndicate's reputation was well earned. They never stopped. They never negotiated. They acquired what they wanted regardless of the cost. Celia was unique even among her people. Her genetic memory contained specific, current intelligence, star charts showing hidden invasion routes, weapons system vulnerabilities, fleet deployment schedules for the Draenoid Armada. This wasn't historical data. This was tactical information that could shift the balance of power across the sector. Other royals carried ancient knowledge. She carried battle plans. The syndicate's leader, a man named Kai, took personal interest in her capture. He wasn't just a crime boss. He was a philosopher of power. He believed strength was the only true currency in the universe. Morality was a weakness. Nobility was a fairy tale. He saw Celia not as a person, but as a resource to be exploited. Her capture would prove his philosophy correct, that in the end, power always wins. Kay had military training and a brutal approach to problem-solving. He used Draenoid weaponry, indicating some alliance with the larger threat. His personal ship often led pursuit operations. He enjoyed the hunt, seeing it as validation of his beliefs, the strong prey upon the weak. It was natural law. Celia represented everything he despised: inherited privilege, moral certainty, the idea that some things shouldn't be for sale. They were close. Always close, Celia described near misses in 3 different star systems, narrow escapes through maintenance ducts, last-second evasions in crowded markets. The syndicate adapted quickly to her tactics. They learned her patterns, predicted her moves. Each escape required new levels of ingenuity, more desperate measures. Her resources were dwindling. Theirs were endless. Kieran's involvement changed the equation dramatically. He was now a variable in their calculations. A mechanic who didn't look away. The syndicate would notice this disruption. They monitored everything. His workshop, his patterns, his transactions, all would be scrutinized. His life had just become collateral in a conflict he didn't understand. The danger was no longer abstract. It was at his doorstep. The rain continued its steady fall outside the workshop. The relative safety of the space felt illusionary now. The reinforced door wouldn't stop a professional extraction team. The hidden passages wouldn't conceal them forever. They needed to move. They needed a plan, and as if in answer to that realization, a sharp knock echoed through the metal walls, not the tentative tap of a customer. The firm, measured knock of someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. The sound cut through the rain, deliberate and unmistakable. Someone had found them. The knock came again, sharper this time. Kieran moved to the door's viewing port. A woman stood in the rain, her posture relaxed but alert. She wore practical clothing, dark and water-resistant with no visible insignia. Her hands were empty, held slightly away from her body. She didn't look like syndicate enforcement. She looked like something else. Kieran cracked the door. The woman's eyes immediately assessed the interior, noting Celia's position, Kieran's stance, the workshop's layout. Her gaze was clinical, detached. She spoke without introduction. "They're 3 blocks out. Scanning for Azuran biomarkers. You have approximately 90 seconds to decide if you're coming with me." She stepped inside without waiting for invitation. Her movements were economical, smooth. She carried a compact medical kit on her belt alongside a holstered energy pistol. The combination was unusual. Healers didn't usually carry weapons. Soldiers didn't usually carry medkits. She looked at Celia, then at Kieran. The mechanic and the princess. Interesting pairing. Her voice held no judgment, only assessment. She was evaluating them as assets, calculating their usefulness. The girl's biometric signature is bleeding through whatever dampening field she's using. They've upgraded their scanners. Kieran remained by the door, hand near his own weapon. "Who are you?" "Arya Verdani, High Council. Your new best option." She didn't smile. The statement was factual, delivered without warmth. "They want her for extraction. We want her for protection. The difference matters." Her mission parameters became clear quickly. She was authorized to use necessary force to bend local laws to expend resources without question. The objective was singular: secure the Azuran heir. How that happened was secondary. Moral flexibility was built into her orders. She reframed Celia completely. Not a victim. Not a refugee. A strategic asset with critical intelligence. "She's not just a child," Arya said, her eyes on Celia. "She's a living database. Her survival impacts sector stability. Your sentimental attachment is commendable but irrelevant. We operate on a different scale." The organization she represented remained vague. The Verdani High Council had interests across multiple systems. They opposed the syndicate's expansion, but their methods were their own. They weren't heroes. They were pragmatists. Celia represented a valuable piece in a larger game. Arya's plan was immediate and specific. "We move now. Off-world. There's a transport waiting at the secondary spaceport. It's rigged with biomasking technology. Once we're clear of Terrace's gravity well, we can deploy proper countermeasures." She looked at Kieran. "Your local knowledge could be useful. Your sentiment could get us killed. Choose which one comes with us." The immediate threat closed in as she spoke. Distant shouts echoed through the rain. The syndicate's sweep was methodical, door to door. They were running scans, getting closer. Time was collapsing around them. Arya didn't wait for debate. She moved to the workshop's rear wall, examining the structure. "There's a maintenance conduit behind this panel. It leads to the lower drainage tunnels. We can bypass their perimeter." She already knew the layout. She'd done her reconnaissance. Kieran looked from Celia's anxious face to Arya's calm determination. The choice was no longer whether to help. It was whether to trust. The syndicate was at the door. The woman with the medkit and the weapon represented the only exit. A heavy impact shook the workshop's main door. The sound of metal straining against its locks. They were out of time. Arya's hand went to her weapon, her expression unchanged. Decision time, mechanic. Stay and die with your principles or move and live to fight another day. The door shuddered again, the locks beginning to fail. The choice was already made for them. The explosion tore through level 3 with a roar that shook the entire structure. A brilliant flash of orange and yellow bloomed outward, followed by a pressure wave that slammed into them. Kieran's ears rang, the sound replaced by a high-pitched whine. Dust and smoke billowed from the new gaping hole in the factory wall, accompanied by the shriek of twisting metal and the frantic blinking of emergency lights. The attack was sudden, brutal, and designed to trap them inside. They were thrust into immediate peril. Falling ceiling panels crashed around them, sending up clouds of dust and debris. Scorched walls wept black streaks where the blast had seared the paint. The air grew thick with a harsh burning smell that made Kieran's eyes water and his throat burn. Damaged pipes overhead ruptured, spraying water in erratic arcs that created deep, treacherous puddles on the gritted metal floor. Every surface was a hazard, every shadow a potential collapse. The factory, once a place of hardened industry, was now a fragile, dying shell. Distrust evaporated in the face of imminent death. Arya's clinical detachment faded, replaced by focused action. She grabbed Celia, pulling the girl away from a collapsing support beam. Kieran didn't hesitate. He moved to flank them, using his body as a shield against falling debris. There was no time for debate, no room for suspicion. They formed a protective triangle by instinct, a makeshift team united by the singular goal of survival. Their skills, once separate, began to interlock. Arya's combat awareness directed their path. Kieran's knowledge of industrial layouts suggested alternate routes. Celia's sharp eyes spotted shifting structures they needed to avoid. The structural groans grew louder, a deep metallic protest signaling a major collapse. A massive section of the catwalk above them sheared free, raining heavy bolts and jagged metal straight toward their position. There was nowhere to run. Arya raised her weapon, a futile gesture against the crushing weight. Kieran pulled Celia closer, turning his back to the impact. Then it stopped. The wreckage hung in the air 6 feet above their heads. Dust particles froze mid-fall. A low hum vibrated through the space emanating from Celia. Her hands were clenched into tight fists at her sides, her eyes squeezed shut in concentration. A faint blue aura shimmered around her trembling form. The massive tangle of metal and wiring hovered, defying gravity, held aloft by a force none of them understood. Kieran and Arya stared, speechless. The display of raw power was terrifying and awe-inspiring. The moment broke as quickly as it began. Celia's knees buckled. The telekinetic grip faltered. The wreckage dropped, but the hesitation gave them the second they needed. They scrambled clear as it crashed down exactly where they'd been standing. The shared glance between Kieran and Arya said everything. The rules had changed. The girl they were protecting was also a weapon they didn't understand. This shared brush with annihilation forged a bond that words never could. The temporary alliance solidified into something more durable. They had seen each other's instincts under fire. They had witnessed an impossible power. They moved as a unit now, no longer 3 separate entities but a single team pushing toward the same objective: escape. The syndicate was still out there, but the immediate enemy was the building itself. They found a damaged maintenance ladder leading downward, a possible route to the lower drainage tunnels and temporary safety. The descent into darkness felt less like running and more like a tactical withdrawal. The air shimmered around Celia, not from heat or distortion, but from raw force. A low hum built in the space, a vibration felt in the teeth rather than heard. The massive section of collapsed catwalk hung suspended above them, a tangle of jagged metal and severed cables frozen mid-fall. Dust particles hung motionless in the air, caught in a field of invisible energy. It defied all physics, all logic. Debris simply stopped moving, metal bent to an unseen will. Kieran stared, his brain refusing to process what his eyes recorded. Objects didn't just float. They obeyed a command that had no visible source. The shock was total, absolute. It wasn't just him. Arya's clinical composure cracked. Her mouth opened slightly, her weapon hand lowering. Even Celia looked stunned by her own action. Her eyes were wide, her small body trembling from the strain. This wasn't a controlled skill. It was a desperate, innate reaction to imminent death, a survival instinct she hadn't known she possessed. The manipulation was precise despite its power. The wreckage didn't just hover. It stabilized. Sharp edges rotated away from them, creating a protective canopy. Smaller pieces of falling debris veered off course, deflected by an unseen barrier. The environment itself became an extension of her will. She wasn't just stopping the collapse. She was reshaping it, creating a pocket of safety within the chaos. The power was staggering in its specificity and its raw, untamed force. This changed everything. Instantly. Her value was no longer just the intelligence in her blood. It was the power in her mind. For allies, she was now a tactical asset beyond compare, a living weapon that could control the battlefield. For enemies, she was an even greater prize, a source of information and a force of destruction they could potentially control or replicate. The danger around her multiplied exponentially. The Syndicate wouldn't just want to extract her. They would want to weaponize her. Kieran's reaction was pure, stunned disbelief. His worldview, built on machinery and tangible cause and effect, fractured. He looked from the floating metal to the trembling child, trying to connect the two. It was impossible. Arya recovered faster. Her surprise gave way to sharp analysis. She assessed Celia not with fear, but with tactical calculation. She saw the potential. The advantage. The immense risk. Her eyes narrowed, already running scenarios, planning how to use this new variable. The power was clearly undeveloped, uncontrolled. It emerged under extreme duress, a frantic burst of self-preservation. The anticipation of what it could become was both thrilling and terrifying. With training, with focus, this raw ability could evolve into something formidable. A precision tool, a shield, a weapon. The potential was limitless, and so were the dangers of that potential falling into the wrong hands. In that moment, the power became their key advantage. The immediate threat of the collapsing factory was neutralized. They had a breathing space they shouldn't have had. A chance to regroup. This wasn't just an escape anymore. It was a shift in the balance of power. They were no longer just prey. They had a defense, an unpredictability their enemies could not have planned for. The moment broke. Celia's strength gave out. The wreckage crashed down, but the delay had saved them. They were already moving. The shock faded, replaced by urgent purpose. The next move was no longer just about finding a hiding place. It was about understanding what they had just witnessed and figuring out how to use it. Their plan needed to account for a new, incredible factor. The girl they were protecting could bend reality with her mind. The drainage tunnel offered a temporary reprieve. The air was damp and carried the metallic tang of recycled water, but it was quiet. No shouting, no blaster fire. Just the distant drip of condensation and their own measured breathing. They sat on a dry section of grating, backs against cold concrete. For the first time in hours, no immediate threat pressed down on them. Celia broke the silence. Her voice was calm, analytical. The best disguise is one people look away from. She stated it as a simple fact, a lesson learned through harsh experience. Her survival strategy wasn't about hiding in shadows. It was about hiding in plain sight. She used the colony's indifference as her primary defense. People saw a dirty, desperate child and their eyes slid away. They didn't want to see her. They didn't want the obligation, the potential danger, the reminder of their own fragile circumstances. She became part of the background, another piece of the colony's bleak scenery. Her appearance was a carefully constructed tool. The ragged clothing, the dirt-smudged skin, the posture of defeat. It was all a performance designed to trigger a specific response. Disregard. She explained it without emotion. It was a tactical decision. A security guard would see a nuisance, not a threat. A merchant would see a potential thief, not a person of interest. The syndicate hunters were looking for a royal heir, a high-value target. They scanned for signs of wealth, education, resistance. They weren't programmed to see a scavenger girl eating with wild dogs. Her greatest protection was their own prejudice. This cynical approach had kept her alive for months. It allowed her to move through crowded markets, to find shelter in overlooked alcoves, to listen to conversations without being noticed. She became invisible by being utterly unremarkable. It was a philosophy born from necessity, a cold understanding of how people function under pressure. On Tyrus, everyone was fighting their own battle. No one had energy to spare for someone else's war. But that strategy had reached its limit. The syndicate had upgraded their scanners. They knew she was here. Hiding was no longer an option. Being overlooked was no longer possible. They had seen her power in the factory. They knew what she was capable of. The rules had changed. Arya was the first to voice it. The passive approach is compromised. We need to go on the offensive. The plan shifted from evasion to engagement. They wouldn't wait to be found. They would find the syndicate's local operation. They would hit them first. They needed to access their communications, their deployment logs. They needed to know how close the main force was. This new direction required a different skill set. Celia's knowledge was strategic. Arya's was tactical. Kieran's was practical. He knew this colony. He knew its infrastructure, its maintenance networks, its hidden pathways. His workshop was a node in a larger system. He understood how things worked down here in the underlevels. His role was no longer just protection. It was infiltration. He would map their target, find its weaknesses, and plan their entry. The mechanic was going to war. Kieran spread the schematics across the dry section of tunnel floor. They weren't official Black Mines layouts, just standard industrial patterns he'd memorized over years of repair work. He traced power conduits with a grease-stained finger, mapping probable routes. His knowledge was general, not specific. He understood how facilities like this were built, not how this particular one operated. The gaps in his understanding were dangerous. He didn't know security patrol rotations, access code protocols, or guard deployment patterns. He was working from common design principles, not intelligence. He focused on the independent power grid. Most secure facilities used redundant systems, primary grid for daily operations, backup generators for emergencies. The Black Mines would have their own dedicated power source, isolated from the colony's main supply. That independence was their vulnerability. He explained it to Arya in simple terms. Overload the primary regulators, force a controlled cascade failure. Lights would flare, systems would reboot in sequence, security would scramble. The chaos would be contained but disorienting. Guards would be reacting, not patrolling. It wasn't about shutting the place down. It was about creating confusion. The coordination required precision. His sabotage would create a 5-minute window of maximum disruption. Arya would use that time to breach a service entrance. Her combat skills would clear the immediate area. Celia would provide overwatch, using her emerging abilities to sense approaching threats. They would move fast, use the shadows, avoid engagement. The plan was straightforward. Its success depended on timing, trust, and things they couldn't control. Kieran's role was foundational. He knew how to access external maintenance panels, how to bypass basic security locks on power relays. His hands understood the feel of overloaded circuits, the sound of straining generators. This wasn't soldiers' work. It was a mechanic's solution to a tactical problem. He would create the opening. They would exploit it. The anticipation was a physical weight. Would the facility follow standard design protocols? Would the guards panic as predicted? Would the systems fail in the right sequence? Every variable was an unknown. Kieran checked his tools. Multimeter, circuit bypass, insulated gloves. Simple things transformed into weapons by knowledge. His practical understanding became their operational foundation. While Arya planned assault vectors and Celia practiced focus exercises, Kieran calculated amperage loads and cooling system failure points. He became the architect of their entry strategy. The mechanic was building a door where none existed. The transition to Celia's role came naturally. Her part required control, not power. She would stand watch at the service entrance, her senses extended. She would feel for approaching patrols, for shifts in energy, for the subtle vibrations of bootsteps on metal grating. Her telekinesis was too unstable for direct assault, but her awareness could be their early warning system. She listened to Kieran's explanations, her blue eyes tracking his finger as it moved across the crude diagram. She nodded once, understanding her assignment. The 3 elements of their plan locked into place. Sabotage, assault, and observation. Each depended on the others. The countdown began. The infiltration began with a single surge. Kieran's hands worked the external maintenance panel, rerouting power through overloaded circuits. Lights inside the facility flickered violently. A low hum built to a strained whine as independent generators fought the imbalance. Alarms blared for 3 seconds before cutting out. The deliberate power fluctuation created pockets of chaos. Guards hesitated at their posts, communication systems sputtering static. It was a mechanic's solution. create confusion without cutting their systems entirely. Their roles were sharply defined. Kieran remained at the panel, monitoring the power grid, ready to trigger a second surge if needed. His job was to keep security off balance to manufacture openings. Arya moved first. She slipped through a service entrance the fluctuation had forced open, her movements silent and efficient. Her role was clearance. She neutralized 2 guards with precise strikes to pressure points, dragging their unconscious forms into shadow. She created a path. Celia provided overwatch from the entrance. Her eyes were closed, her focus turned inward. She didn't use her telekinesis to move objects. She used it to feel the facility. She sensed the vibrations of bootsteps on grating, the shift of air currents from opening doors, the concentrated energy of alert personnel. Her role was early warning. She whispered directions to Arya through a comm link, her voice calm. 2 approaching from the east corridor. Hold position. Her awareness became their radar. The timing was everything. Kieran's surges lasted 90 seconds each. Arya had to move through designated sectors within that window, exploiting the momentary blindness. Celia's warnings ensured she avoided patrols rerouted by the disruption. They moved like a single organism with 3 specialized parts. The mechanic created the opportunity. The warrior exploited it. The seer guided them through the danger. The strategy was high risk. The power fluctuations were unpredictable. A surge could be too weak, ignored by seasoned guards. It could be too strong, triggering a full lockdown instead of a temporary lapse. Arya's stealth could fail against a random patrol. Celia's focus could break under the strain of processing so much sensory input. They were betting everything on a plan built on generalities and untested power. It worked. The coordinated chaos provided just enough cover. They bypassed the main security checkpoints, moving through maintenance shafts and empty storage bays. Arya's knowledge of facility layouts guided them toward the central core. Celia's senses alerted them to a hidden patrol near a junction, allowing a last-second diversion. They reached a heavy reinforced door marked with the Syndicate symbol. The command center. Kieran's final power surge hit as they arrived. The door's magnetic locks disengaged for a 5-second reboot cycle. Arya shoved it open. They stepped into a room filled with monitoring stations and holographic displays. The intelligence they needed was here. Deployment schedules, scanner frequencies, comm logs detailing the hunt for Celia. The data drive was their objective, a physical unit required for extraction. The system wasn't networked. It was in a port on the central console. They were in. Now they had to steal its secrets and get out alive. The real danger was just beginning. The door hissed open to reveal Draxler Ka standing alone in the command center. He wasn't what they expected. No heavy armor, no obvious weapons. Just a man in dark functional clothing, his hands relaxed at his sides. His eyes moved over them with clinical interest, like a scientist examining lab specimens. The air grew still. This was no ordinary Syndicate enforcer. Kay moved first. His attack was brutally efficient. No wasted motion. He closed the distance in 3 quick steps, his body moving with unnerving grace. Kieran barely raised his staff in time to block a strike that would have shattered his wrist. The impact vibrated through the metal, numbing Kieran's hands. Their preparation meant nothing against this level of skill. Ka fought with a cold precision that spoke of military training in countless battles. His equipment gave him clear advantages. Reinforced knuckle guards on his gloves turned his fists into weapons. His boots had traction studs that gripped the polished floor perfectly. He moved like water flowing around their defenses. When Arya fired her energy pistol, he sidestepped the shot without seeming to look. The bolt impacted the wall behind him, leaving a scorch mark. He didn't even flinch. His philosophy emerged between strikes. "Nobility is an illusion," he said, his voice calm despite the combat. He blocked Kieran's staff strike with his forearm, the reinforced material absorbing the impact. Power is the only reality. He believed strength justified everything. Mercy was weakness. Honor was a fairy tale for those who couldn't face the truth. He saw Celia not as a person, but as a resource. "You're protecting damaged goods," he told Kieran, his eyes mocking. "She's been eating garbage, living like an animal." Just another piece of street trash, they adapted quickly. Direct confrontation was suicide. Kieran used his staff to maintain distance, creating space for Arya to flank. She switched to close quarters tactics, aiming for joints and pressure points. Celia didn't try to use her telekinesis offensively. Instead, she created distractions. A loose panel clattered to the floor behind Ka. A console sparked suddenly. Small things, but enough to break his concentration for split seconds. The battle became a test of endurance. Ka was stronger, faster, better equipped, but they were three. They began working together, reading each other's movements. Kieran would draw an attack. Arya would exploit the opening it created. Celia would sense where Kay's attention was focused and create a diversion elsewhere. They couldn't beat him through strength, so they used coordination instead. The resolution came from understanding their environment. Kieran noticed the security containment field generator in the ceiling. It was designed to freeze intruders in place. He created an opening, taking a cut to his arm to get inside Ka's guard. Arya provided covering fire, forcing Ka to defend. Celia used her slingshot to hit the activation panel. The field engaged with a low hum. Ka froze mid-motion, his body locked in place. He could still breathe, still think, but he couldn't move or speak. Contained, not killed. They left him there, a statue of frustrated power. The intelligence data waited in the central console. The physical drive slid out smoothly when Kieran triggered the release sequence. It was smaller than he expected. A sealed cylinder of dark metal. The information inside could warn billions, could change everything. They had what they came for. Now they just had to escape with it. Kieran's fingers found the data port on the central console. The drive was a small sealed cylinder of dark metal. He triggered the extraction sequence. A low hum filled the room as the security protocols engaged. The console screen flashed a red warning. Biometric authentication required. It needed Ka's handprint or retinal scan. They were locked out. Arya moved quickly. She pulled a compact device from her belt, a field decryptor. She attached it to the console's access panel. The device whirred, its lights blinking rapidly as it cycled through security overrides. The system resisted. Another warning flashed. Unauthorized access attempt detected. Facility lockdown imminent. They had seconds before reinforcements arrived and sealed them in. Celia stepped forward. Her small blue hand hovered over the console. She closed her eyes. A faint blue aura shimmered around her fingers. The console screen flickered. The warning messages vanished. The system accepted her genetic signature as legitimate. The drive released with a soft click. She had bypassed the security using her Azuran connection to the data itself. The intelligence was hers by birthright. The drive felt cold in Kieran's hand. Its weight was insignificant, but its contents were immense. Arya confirmed it with a grim expression. The data held attack vectors, fleet compositions, timelines, detailed plans for the Draenoid invasion, communication protocols, everything. This was more than tactical information. It was a warning that could save billions. The mission scope expanded instantly. They were no longer just saving a princess. They were trying to save entire colonies. The immediate value was clear. They could alert defense forces. They could mobilize fleets, reinforce vulnerable worlds, prepare countermeasures. The data provided a fighting chance against an overwhelming threat. The long-term implications were deeper. This intelligence could reveal Draenoid weaknesses. It could provide insight into their strategy, their technology, their command structure. It was the key to turning an inevitable defeat into a possible victory. The question of how to use it was urgent. They needed to get it to the Verdani High Command. The information required analysis, distribution, coordination across multiple systems. It was useless sitting in a drive in their hands. It needed to reach people who could act on it. The anticipation was a tangible pressure. They had the key. Now they had to deliver it. Their escape route was already mapped. Maintenance tunnels ran beneath the facility, old service corridors for repair crews. They offered a path to the outside, away from the main entrances. The tunnels were narrow, poorly lit, and likely trapped. But they were their only option with the main exit sealed. The plan was simple. Get to the tunnels, navigate to the surface, find transport off-world. The transition was immediate. They moved toward a grated floor panel Kieran had identified earlier. He pried it open with his staff. A dark shaft dropped into emptiness below. A rusty ladder led downward. The air that rose from the opening smelled of damp metal and stale water. The way out was also a way into uncertainty. They climbed down into the darkness, the data drive secure in Kieran's pocket. The hazardous exit had begun. The maintenance tunnel sloped downward into darkness. Cold, damp air rose to meet them, carrying the sharp smell of rust and standing water. Metal rungs, slick with condensation, offered the only way down. Kieran went first, testing each step. The shaft was narrow, forcing them to descend single file. Distant echoes followed them. Boots on grating shouted commands. The pursuit hadn't ended. It had just moved underground. Their path was a hazardous maze of old service corridors. Leaking pipes dripped corrosive fluid that sizzled on contact with the metal walkways. Sections of grating were missing, revealing black voids below. They moved through clouds of steam from ruptured conduits, the hot mist obscuring vision and leaving their skin slick. In one section, the tunnel floor was half submerged in murky, chemical-tinged water. They waded through it silently, the liquid soaking their boots and trousers, its origin best left unconsidered. Each person's skills became critical for navigation. Kieran's knowledge of industrial systems identified safe pathways and potential dangers. He pointed out load-bearing walls to avoid, identified live power conduits by their hum. Arya's combat awareness tracked the sounds of pursuit. She signaled stops, directed them into side passages moments before patrols passed. Her familiarity with facility layouts helped her guess their location based on pipe markings and junction numbers. Celia used her senses differently. She didn't need to see. She felt the vibrations through the metal, sensing the mass and movement of search parties several corridors away. Her quiet warnings, a touch on an arm, a whispered "wait," saved them multiple times. The pressure was constant. They moved in near total silence, communicating with gestures and glances. Every footstep was measured, every breath controlled. They paused at intersections, listening. Arya would peer around a corner, then signal all clear. Kieran would check overhead for unstable panels. Celia would stand with her eyes closed, reading the tremors in the structure. Their coordination was a fragile, wordless dance. A mistake by any one of them would doom them all. The data drive in Kieran's pocket felt heavier with every step. The anticipation built with each turn. Was the rendezvous point still secure? Had Captain Vex been discovered? Had the Syndicate already locked down the entire sector? They reached a final ladder leading upward to a street-level access hatch. Kieran climbed first, pushing the heavy cover aside just enough to see out. The rain had returned, sheeting down in the dark. A single transport sat waiting, its engines idling. A figure stood beside it, face obscured by a hood. They emerged into the downpour. The figure lowered its hood, revealing a weathered face. Captain Vex? Her eyes scanned them quickly, assessing their condition. She didn't offer greetings. She jerked a thumb toward the transport's open hatch. "Get in." "We're burning daylight," her voice was rough, impatient. The meeting was brief, functional. No questions, no explanations. Just passage offered and accepted. They scrambled aboard the ship. The hatch sealed behind them, cutting off the sound of rain and the smell of Tyrus. The interior was utilitarian, all bare metal and secured cargo nets. The engines changed pitch, lifting them from the wet pavement. Through a viewport, the colony fell away, its neon lights blurring into streaks through the rain. They were off-world. The immediate danger was behind them. The journey to whatever came next had begun. The transport climbed through the atmosphere, heading for the cold dark of space. The ship's engines hummed a steady rhythm, a quiet contrast to the chaos they'd left behind. They sat on cargo crates in the dimly lit hold. The air smelled of recycled oxygen and cold metal. For the first time in days, no one was shooting at them. Kieran looked at his hands. The grease stains were still there, but they felt different now. They weren't just marks of a solitary life. They were evidence of work that mattered. He had spent years building walls, maintaining distance. Now he was protecting something. The shift was quiet but complete. He was no longer just a mechanic. He was a guardian. Celia watched the stars streak past the viewport. Her blue skin seemed to absorb the faint light. The ragged clothing was gone, replaced by a clean, practical jumpsuit from the ship's supplies. She held herself differently. The hunch of a scavenger was gone. Her posture was straight, her gaze steady. She was no longer hiding. The data drive sat on a crate between them. It was a small thing, but it held the fates of billions. She understood her responsibility now. It wasn't enough to just survive. She had to warn others. The fight was bigger than any one person. Arya approached Kieran. She held out a data slate. On it was a formal offer. Verdani Intelligence Service, Field Operations Division. She didn't give a speech. Her words were straightforward. "We could use someone with your skills. Someone who understands how things work in the places no one looks." The offer was more than a job. It was an invitation into a larger world, a chance to use his knowledge for something beyond his own survival. It acknowledged his transformation from a man who fixed machines to a man who could help fix broken situations. The cynicism that once protected him felt like a shell he'd outgrown. Their next destination was clear. The Verdani High Council. The data needed analysis, distribution. Their journey was just beginning. The relative safety of the ship was a pause, not an ending. The Syndicate was still out there. The Draenoid invasion was still coming, but they were no longer running from it. They were moving toward it. The resolution was in their silence, in the way they all looked at the same star chart on the main screen. Their purpose was unified now. A mechanic, a princess, and a warrior. Each brought something necessary. The commitment to a broader resistance was not declared with grand words. It was in the acceptance of the new roles. Kieran's nod to Arya, Celia's hand resting on the data drive. They were a team. The focus had shifted from escaping a planet to confronting an empire. The path ahead was dangerous, likely hopeless, but they had a chance they didn't have before. They had intelligence. They had each other. The ship changed course, its navigation computer locking onto coordinates light years away. The hum of the engines deepened. They were going to the heart of the resistance. The real work was just beginning. 3 individuals, each transformed by a single choice. A princess who learned to survive on scraps, a spy who rediscovered her conscience, a mechanic who saw value where others saw nothing. Their alliance began as a desperate rescue. It became the foundation of a greater fight. This was only the beginning, a prologue to the conflict that would define humanity's future across the stars. The war is coming, but sometimes the most powerful rebellion starts not with a weapon, but with a simple act of seeing someone the world has chosen to ignore and offering a hand.